Well, we want to wish a happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers in our community and to all mothers everywhere. None of us would be here without our moms, that's for sure. And we want to also recognize that when Mother's Day comes along, sometimes it's not easy for everyone. You know, not everyone had the opportunity to be a mom. Maybe people wanted children and couldn't have them, or didn't have them, or maybe our experiences with our mothers was not what we had hoped it would be or expected it should be. Maybe our mother was not capable of giving us at that time the love that we would expect. And we have to be sensitive to that. We have to be aware of that. And bless each and every person right where they are. And what I would like to talk about today is I want to talk about motherhood itself as a symbol of God's unconditional love, and whether that unconditional love comes to us through what society, you know, would typically say through our mother, or whether it comes to us in another way, or whether we give that unconditional love to another through the institution of motherhood or in some other way. It is this unconditional love that I want to focus on today. This unconditional love that to me motherhood itself represents. So the first point I would like to make is that our intellect is limited. Our mind's ability to grasp things is limited at this time. It may grow and expand over the eons. But I think we have to recognize that at this point in time, there are things that we just can't grasp. We just can't understand. Intellectually and logically, it does not make any sense to us. However, they are there. And for example, if you look in quantum physics and you look at the double slit experiments for light, is light a wave or is light a particle, or is light both a wave and a particle, and does light start its travel as one and then change to the other, and all of these things that to our sense of logic don't add up, right? Because in our sense of logic, things are either true or false, but they can't be both. Now, there are other systems of logic in which something might be true, might be false, might be neither, might be both. But in the logic that we have inherited, it doesn't make sense. You see, it doesn't make sense. Our intellect, our scientists can tell us that they theorize about this incident called the Big Bang, where the universe came into creation. But they don't know what happened the moment before. And they will tell us that they can't know what happened the moment before because everything that we know, the structure, the order, the way that we know things didn't exist at the time. There was no time, there was no space. There was no matter. And yet, the intellect can take us to that point of saying, there's something there that the intellect cannot know. And that's as far as it can go. And this, in Eastern tradition, is where the idea of walking the razor's edge comes from. Right? We can use the mind and the intellect to tell us, to point to the place where the mind and the intellect can't go. It can't get there. Whatever is there is beyond the capability of the mind and the intellect to grasp. But yet it's there. Yet it's there. How do we go there? How do we get there? And what we come to recognize is there are things that we can experience that we can't understand. The intellect can't explain. The words aren't there, the ineffableness of the divine. This is why in Hindu prayers they speak of God as the ineffable one. Oh, ineffable one. any word at all that we choose to use to describe God or the divine or spirit, whatever words people use, the words themselves are woefully inadequate. They just can't describe that. So we have to understand that there are things that are beyond our ability to grasp intellectually. And what we do as human beings is we try to create symbols. We try to create something that we are familiar with, and then we liken it to that, you know. Joseph Campbell tells us, I think it was Campbell, it might have been Joseph Campbell, might have been Emmett Fox, says that before Moses came along, the heavens were filled with gods and goddesses of every type. There was one for everything. You know, there was a god of the weather and a god of the sea and a god of the crops and a god of the rain and all these kinds of things. And Moses came along and brought into popular understanding or popular belief something that it wasn't unique to him. It was something that was known, but not generally talked about. And that is that there's only one God. And again, the word God is totally inadequate. Joseph Campbell tells us that God is a metaphor for that which transcends every boundary of human limitations. So try to think of that when you hear the word God. Not an old man with a long white beard sitting up on a throne in the sky. But that which transcends every limitation. It transcends time and space. It transcends limits of power. It transcends beginnings and middles and ends, and it just simply is. It's the isness of Buddhism, the suchness of Buddhism, the I amness of Judaism. So Moses comes along and says, no. All of these different gods and goddesses that you have up there, there's only one. There's only one power. There's only one life. There's only one. So with that act, the heavens were swept clean. Yeah? All of these different entities and characters and saints and angels and all of these things, they were gods and goddesses. They were removed. And since that day, we have been slowly putting them back in. And so now, there's only one God, but we have, for example, saints who are the patron saints of the weather and the patron saints of the travelers and things like that. I think we have angels and we have all of these other ideas. And again, these are constructs in our mind. And all they are telling us is that this idea of one, this idea of unity and singularity, this idea of complete oneness is beyond our intellect's ability to grasp, and we have to create these other little characters, these other little symbols in order for us to try to grab hold of it, you know. So we have the symbol that comes to us from the east of the men holding the elephant, and they couldn't see, and they each had a different part of the elephant, and they were trying to describe to one another what an elephant is like. Now they tried. This is important, I think, for us to understand is that whenever we have something new, something totally new to us, we try to relate it to something we already know. This is how we learn. We have something that's new and something that's abstract, and then we try to relate it to something that we know. So the one man had a hold of the elephant's leg, and he says, the elephant is like a tree. And another one was pushing on the side of the elephant. He said, no, an elephant is like a wall. And one had the elephant's trunk, and he said, no, the elephant is like a big snake. And another one had the elephant's tail. And he said, no, you're all wrong. He says, the elephant is like a rope. Now, each was correct from his own limited perspective, but none of them had the ability to grasp the whole. So we want to kind of keep that in mind as we go to explore these ideas of divine, of religion, of spirit, of unconditional love. So unconditional love itself is a concept that is probably hard for us to understand. We don't really grasp it in our human experience. Not much, not often. We don't grasp it. Right? The divine, or God, as Campbell tells us, is a metaphor for that which transcends every barrier, every limitation of human understanding. And human understanding is full of conditions. Everything about us is full of conditions. And it's hard for us to think of anything that is completely unconditional. And then there's this thing called love, and what is love? And what we want to talk about today is, what is this thing called unconditional love, and how does this institution of motherhood remind us of that? Right? So when we think of motherhood, not only are we having memories of our mothers and those who fulfill the roles of motherhood in this world, or those who fulfilled the role of motherhood in our lives if it wasn't our birth mother. Somewhere there's unconditional love, I think. Somewhere it's unconditional love that we're relating to, and this institution is a symbol for that. Many thousands of years ago in Egypt, there was a religion that we would call a cult. Not you and I, but our scientists would call a cult. And the word cult is greatly misused. Typically the word cult, people just use that to mean something they don't understand. If they don't understand a religion, well, it must be a cult. And of course, one person's religion is another person's cult. But they described this religion as a cult that worshipped cows. Now, it's kind of arrogant of us here in the 21st century to sit back and say, oh, how quaint, as people thought cows were God. But that's not what it was about. We miss it when we try to label it. And the intellect does that. It tries to label things, and it says, I think I understand it because I put a label on it. We don't understand anything other than whatever that label means to us. So we look at that and we say, oh, these people worshipped cows. But the cow to them was a symbol of life itself. By looking at the cow and looking at the life cycle of the cow and looking at the birth of a calf and looking at how the cow could take in grass and produce milk, and how the calf came out of the cow, and how the milk that the cow produced could feed a human child. By contemplating the mystery of this cow, the people realized the unity of life, the oneness of life. Who is the creator that organized all of this so wonderfully? And the people understood that, but that was their entry point. That was their handle, if you will, which we're all trying to get a handle on that which is ineffable. We're all trying to get a hold of that which can't be held. And for them, they used the symbolism of the cow. They even built their temples in the shape of a cow. And when they went in to worship, they went into the cow to worship. As I say, we can say, well, isn't that quaint? You know, these people somehow believed that the cow was God, but that wasn't it. That was only a symbol to them. We have to learn to look past the obvious. We have to learn to look past the appearances. We have to start to ask ourselves, but what does this mean? What does love mean? What does motherhood mean? So this idea of love, then, this idea of love, the best explanation that I have found so far in my life is the experience of oneness, the experience of unity, the experience of kinship. The people that we love, the people we love in this world are the ones we feel one with. We feel something in common with them. We feel something connected with them. Our pets, we love our pets. They're ours, you know. We give them affection, they give us affection. Our country, we love our country. All of these things that we talk about when we really get to love. Now, love is a greatly misused word, right? People say, well, I love hamburgers. Well, you know, so they use love as an appetite or a like. I have an appetite for hamburgers. I like hamburgers. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, think about the people in your life that you truly feel love for. And isn't there this feeling of oneness, this feeling of belonging, this feeling of unity? Now again, in our human experience, we often make that conditional, that love is conditional. I love you because we share genes, because we're raised in the same family. I love you because we belong to the same organizations. I love you because we go to the same church and we believe the same way. And all of these things that are limiting. And they're exclusive, which means you'll hear people say, well, I can love this person because they believe the same way I do, but I can't love other people because they don't. And human love starts to draw lines and boundaries and separation. But if we think back about divine love, there can be no boundary. There can be no separation, because divine love has created each and every one of us out of itself. It has created the spirit that we recognize as us. It has given us these beautiful bodies to express life here, in this place, at this time. And it knows us as it knows itself. In other words, it has no sense of self and other. You and I, we look, for example, at our body and we say, well, this is my hand. And we don't think, well, that's not part of me. We identify with that. That's my hand. That's me. And we have to consider that the divine recognizes each and every one of us as part of itself. So its love for us is unconditional. It can only love us as it loves itself. Right? Its love for us is unconditional. And this is why in the Bible we're told, Spirit sends the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. The divine isn't going to make distinctions or divide and say, well, I love these people because they live on this part of the globe, but I don't love these people who live over on this part of the globe. This is unconditional love. This is without qualifying. There's nothing that we can do to either make the divine love us or stop loving us. Right? Meister Eckhart in around 1300 is quoted as saying, I never thank God for loving me because God can't help itself. God can't help itself. And I'm sure what he said was very shocking to the people of his day and age. But think about that. God can't help but loving us because it knows us as part of itself. And that is unconditional love. That is unconditional love. So when we step into the human realm now, this is very difficult for us to get our mind around. How can we be one with everything? How can God be one with everything? How can it know every one and everything as part of itself? How can it love unconditionally? Can it get angry? Can it get angry? Is it possible for that which is perfect peace to be angry? We have to think about these things. We have to think about the the models and the images that we grew up with of what divine love is, and ask ourselves, could this be so? So I think if we examine, if we think about what motherhood means, I think we can come to a closer understanding in our human experience of what this unconditional love is. And Frederick Bales does a beautiful job of this in his book, Your Mind Can Heal You, which is an excellent book. I think everybody needs to read it and perhaps have a copy of it on your bookshelf. But he starts to describe the process by which the human body comes into being. And he says, just think about the miracle. We look too far off for miracles. We want to go out somewhere else and look for miracles. And they are right before us every day, just as the Egyptians could see it in the way that a cow could take in the grass and produce life in the form of a calf and life in the form of milk. With us every day is the miracle. And so here at the moment of conception, you have the sperm and the egg coming together. You have two cells come together and they split and they make one unique cell that came from the two, combining characteristics of both. But then that one splits again and makes two, and two become four, and four become eight, and so on, and so on, and so on. And some become hard and they become bone, and some become gelatin-like and transparent and they become eyes, and some become organs and hearts that beat, and some become blood that moves through the blood vessels. And all of this unfolds in perfect order. Who created this? Not you and I, not our parents, but there is a process of divine love, an experience of oneness that is unfolding here. And over time, this little body grows, and now we have the sonograms, and you can see the pictures of the children while they're still in the womb. Some of them are sucking their thumbs, just relaxing, taking it easy. And at that moment, during this process, I don't think two human beings will ever be closer, will ever be more in unity with one another than that child growing within its mother's womb. The child doesn't have to eat. The child doesn't have to breathe. The child doesn't have to drink. Divine love takes care of that through a process so simple that we don't even have to think about it. And in fact, if we had to think about it, we probably couldn't figure it all out. But yet just naturally and just easily, this takes place. The rhythm of our mother's heart beating soothes us, so that even after we're born, if a clock or a metronome is put in the room that beats at approximately the same rate, it is soothing to the child. Complete dependence, complete acceptance. So easily. This little child is just one with its mother's body. It doesn't think about it, can't reject it, doesn't think it's not worthy. It just is. It is the isness. It is the suchness. And then when the time comes for the child to be born, Its little lungs in the womb were breathing fluid to make them stronger. But when time comes for it to be born, the fluid has to get out of the way. And this process is designed so perfectly, that the little body is squeezed through the birth canal, which forces all of the fluid out of the lungs. So when our little heads come into the world, and then our chest comes into the world, and we expand our lungs automatically, they breathe in the air that was already here and already waiting for us. If we think about that process, we can see that every step of the way is in divine order. Every step of the way, every division of the cells, every multiplication of the cells, every part of the process is in divine order. And then the moment the child is born, it's ready to nurse. I trained as a paramedic many years ago, and that was one of the things they trained us to do if we had to deliver a baby. As soon as the baby was born, give it to the mom to nurse. It helps both of them. Who taught that child how to nurse? Who prepared the mother's body to have the food that's perfect for that little one's growth? So if we start to think about motherhood in this light, I think we start to understand it as a living example of unconditional love. Unconditional love. And then what we want to do, like the Egyptians who looked at the cows and saw them as a symbol of the magnificence of God's creation, we want to look back then and say, but the unconditional love that we see, the complete unity, the complete oneness without judgment, without condition, this complete unity is a symbol of God's love for us. Divine love has created us out of itself for itself. Aquinas says that our hearts shall remain restless until they repose in Thee. Bales asks us to consider that the love and the intelligence and the care that brought us through this process of growing in our mother's womb and bringing us into the world did not abandon us at that moment, did not cast us into the earth and say, now you're on your own. But it is with us always, closer than our breath, nearer than our hands and feet. It is here. It is now. It is unconditional. We start to come into the realization of our own selves we can do nothing, but it is the Spirit within that does the work, that beats our hearts, that lives our lives. And if we start to come into this understanding that this experience of unconditional love that perhaps motherhood represents to us, that it is the experience of unconditional love that is so important to us, then we can start to understand that there are other ways for us to be that love to another human being, to share that love with another human being, to experience that love in the presence of another human being. Right here, right now. Start to come into an understanding that being that instrument of love is what's important for all of us, for each and every one of us. Because the divine love knows no conditions. The divine love knows no restraints. Divine love loves us because it can't help but doing so. And when we can experience that ourselves, we are in the presence of the divine. We are experiencing the presence of the divine. Ralph Waldo Trine, in his book In Tune with the Infinite, which is another book that I would suggest everybody ought to read and have on their bookcase, he gives us a beautiful, beautiful story of a man who lived in California. He had a ranch in California, and in California, you know, water is precious, and the water comes down from the mountains in aqueducts. And as it passes through the farmland, there's these little gates on the aqueducts. You know, it's got a handle that you turn, and this metal gate goes up and down. And the farmers can open that gate, and they can draw water into their property. Of course, they have to pay for it, but they draw the water into their property. And this one man had a farm, and he had the gate opened on the aqueduct, and a little stream was coming down, and that little stream came down, and it went into a pond, and the pond was surrounded by lush grass and beautiful trees, and the trees were full of birds that would come and sing, and as the water left the pond, it went down and it made a little stream that meandered through the pasture, and there was a stripe of green along the little stream, and the animals would come and the animals would drink. And on the weekends, people would come from the city. The ground was open for picnic, and people would come from the city, and they would bring their children in their picnic baskets and spread out their blankets. And they would sit there and they would enjoy the beauty. And the man had to leave the country for a while, so he sublet his property to another. And the new resident went up the hill and closed the gate. He didn't want to pay for that water. Didn't need the water. Didn't want to pay for it. And what happened is as the water stopped flowing, the pond began to stagnate. And where there had been the smell of beautiful flowers, now there was the stench of rotting vegetation. And the stripe of green where the little stream went down through the pasture, and it dried up and it turned brown, and the animals that came to drink stopped coming to drink. And the trees that were along the pond and the lush grass all started to die out. And the people stopped coming, and the children stopped coming, and the picnics ceased to be. And all that was required for all of that beauty and all of that joy to reappear was for someone to open that gate again. Because once that floodgate was opened, once the gate was opened, once that water started to flow again, everything else automatically took place. And what I would propose that we should consider today is that each and every one of our lives is like this little pond and like this little park. It has the potential of being something lovely and something beautiful and something joyous, where people can come and they can celebrate and they can be happy. Or it can be something that drives people away. And while we're not looking to open a floodgate of water, we are looking to open a floodgate of love. I believe that we are created as instruments of love, that we have come here to learn how to love, And the best way to learn how to love is to let that love flow through us. To be the best instrument of love that we can possibly be. We have to trust in the process. We have to trust that as we do this, that there is an intelligence within us that knows exactly what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And we have to recognize that we can do this without regard to whether we're related genetically, or whether we're related philosophically, or whether we live within the same imaginary line on a map. But that we have come here to learn how to love unconditionally. We have come here to learn that unconditional love that motherhood represents. Can we love ourselves that way? Can we love each other that way? Can we love God that way? Can we love those who would do us harm that way? Not saying that what they're doing, their behavior, is acceptable. But can we love the person? In the book, I believe it was Genesis, maybe it's Exodus, I'm not sure. But in the book where Moses, I believe it's Exodus, Moses starts to realize that he's been called. It's going to be his purpose in life. His role is going to be to lead the Israelites out of the confusion of Egypt. And he's not ready yet. He's not ready. He's angry. He kills an Egyptian officer. Now, remember, I think these stories are teaching stories, not necessarily historical fact. That's the growth of each and every one of us. You see, we all start to come to realize that there's something we ought to be doing, but we're not ready for it yet. So Moses had to go out into the desert, and the desert represents the spiritual practice, the prayer life. And he went to the well. Remember the story? He went to the well. Now the well represents deeper consciousness, making our contact with God. He went to the well, and there he found the 7 sisters. And they were daughters of a priest, again representing our approach to God. And there was one daughter who took a liking to him and he to her. And he married her. And he stayed with her in the desert for 40 years. 40 means as long as it takes. As long as it takes. 40 days, 40 nights, 40 years, 40 weeks. 40 means as long as it takes to get it together physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. That's the number 4. And I think love, what the story represents to me is that love is our easiest approach to God. If we can look within ourselves and ask ourselves, where have I been holding back love? And if we can allow those boundaries to dissolve, remember, because those boundaries are ideas or constructs in our own mind. We put them there, we can take them away. But if we go within ourselves and we think, how can I love more? How can I feel more at one with this person? How can I recognize that this person and myself are 2 parts of the same whole? We then open that gate. we then start to allow that unconditional love to flow through us. And as the gate, when reopened, would wash away the stagnant water, as the gate, when reopened, would return the lush and beautiful life to the pond, that unconditional love, as it flows through us and to us, starts to renew us, starts to renew us. So in this day that we take to celebrate motherhood, and we celebrate all of our mothers, we celebrate all of the mothers in the community, and let's celebrate unconditional love. And let's recognize that we, each and every one of us, we are God's instruments of unconditional love. God loves us because God cannot help but loving us. Can we allow ourselves to love each other the same way? There's someone somewhere right now, there's someone somewhere who can use your love. Open your heart. Let it flow through. Find a way. Find a way to let God's unconditional love flow to you and through you and as you. Let that change your life. And so it is. So we come together then in this spirit of unconditional love, and we release and we let go of every and any idea that divides us, that separates us. Instead, we sit together in the light, in the field beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing. We just come and sit together. We let the feeling of oneness, of unity, to overtake us, to soothe our fears, to remove our doubts. And we just sit in God's love. We release and we let go of everything unlike love. When the light enters the room, the darkness disappears, and we let the light of God's love enter our hearts and dissolve everything unlike itself. We accept God's love into our lives, and we accept our purpose and our role as God's instruments of unconditional love. We are grateful for the opportunity to be here today to discuss these ideas. We are grateful for motherhood, which reminds us in a tangible way of what unconditional love is. We are grateful to know that there's a power that responds to us according to our belief, and that power is right now producing whatever change or changes as needs must be in our consciousness. That we might be a better instrument of God's love this day and every day from now on. We release this treatment to that perfect law, so certain it is done, that we say together, and so it is.